confidence. But of course, government spending is a detraction from the economy. And at present, what we've seen is that the private sector isn't creating enough jobs to soak up those jobs that are being lost in the public sector. So there is significant issues, and that creates more perhaps social unrest and problems and strikes that we're seeing.
And can you tell me what the budget deficit is related to, what the coalition government is doing with relation to the budget deficit, and the decision that it has made on the pensions?
Well, I think we need to sort of put it into perspective and understand that when this coalition government came into power, 1 in 4 of every pounds that the government spent was actually borrowed. This is a huge issue. We're talking around 9, 10, 11% of GDP over the last few years in terms of actual borrowing. And that translates into something like 150 to 180 billion pounds a year of additional borrowing. This has to be scaled back. You can't live on your credit card forever. You can overspend for a certain amount of time, and the gamble there was to try and stimulate the economy. But at a certain point, you have to scale it back. Otherwise, people lose. You lose credibility in other people's minds in terms of the ability to service your debt and repay the debt long term.
Now, trade unions ordered 140 administrative workers to go to these protests, and for the reforms of the coalition government for the pensions. What is the ultimate objective for the trade unions taking this strike? Trying to gather as many people as they can. What's the ultimate objective? What are they trying to achieve?
Well, they're trying to get the best for their members, and they've done very well over the years at getting the best for their members. You would expect them to fight for the members, because that's their reason for existing, and they view that they are under attack in terms of the number of job losses and the reduction in pension benefits, and they will react. And really, how this is going to play out is much more in public opinion. If, broadly speaking, the unions seem to have public support, then the strikes may well carry on for some time. If the government, on the other hand, wins the battle of public opinion, and public opinion moves against the unions, we may see some kind of agreement actually take place at some point.
Tell me a little bit about how the system is working, how the coalition government is spending the money. What's going wrong here?
Well, government spends money in many different ways. Everything from running the civil service to paying doctors, nurses, teachers, policemen. There's all sorts of services, everything like rebuilding of roads, new infrastructure projects, all sorts of ways that the government spends money. One would argue that perhaps over the last government, the Labour government, a lot of additional administrative jobs were created in the civil service, which perhaps is a drain on the whole system. But really, cuts have to be made broadly across most departments, and save from the NHS, which is getting protected to some extent, and little tiny budgets like the science budget are being protected. Really, everything else is going to have to be cut, and it has to be very broad based.
Analysts say that this is the start of nationwide protests, that they will be expecting more protests for the future months to come, and this is likely that the government won't be able to resolve this situation. Now, they say that analysts also say that Britain is heading towards another recession in a month's time. Will things get out of hand in terms of the seeing more protests?
Oh, it definitely will be more protests. That goes without saying. That we already had a number of protests from the students, and we're now starting to get more union militancy, and that will carry on as long as austerity measures are in place. And of course, it's very difficult. You'd want to implement significant reforms when you're strong. So if you're cutting jobs in one sector, there's at least a growing economy that can soak up the extra jobs, but that isn't the case. So you're doing reforms, significant reforms of government spending and pension reforms at a time when the economy is weak, which is very difficult for people to understand. But my view, it has to get done.
And is it likely to get? We'd like to see protests similar to the riots that we saw that the students had. Of course, what happened there was that the fees had tripled, and then there's the Occupy movement.
Yeah.
Is it just a wave of chaos, of financial chaos that's getting bigger and bigger?
I don't think the financial chaos has returned as yet. I think that we're in the midst of a financial, or perhaps beginning of a very large financial crisis, which the Eurozone is really at the forefront of this financial crisis, and that's likely to deepen. Whether we are slowing down, the global economy is slowing down, and I would argue that there's all this talk of a double dip recession has completely missed the point, in that we never got out of it in the first place. And I would argue that we are not in a cyclical downturn, but we're in a structural downturn that started with the credit crunch back in 2007. Our generation's depression, if you like. And there's a significant amount of deleveraging that has to take place. Too much debt has been built up in the world. That goes for individuals and for governments. And it's going to take time for that to be worked through. Now, either you slowly deleverage in an organised way, or you have write it off towards the start, but that would cause a financial crisis in itself if we have a significant amount of defaults that happen, especially in a number of the sovereigns. At the same time, it could be or even if just Greece defaults, it could be the start of a significant snowball effect. Many would argue that's already started. So
you would say that this is really the starting phase of something that will be soon getting worse and worse.
I think we started back in 2007, and this whole process started off then, and we are in a period of deleveraging, and consumers have been deleveraging to some extent, but of course governments haven't been deleveraging. They've been borrowing more and more and more to try and prop up the global economy, and that level of additional budget deficits has become unsustainable, and that's why we have the sovereign debt crisis that we have. In the UK, the consumer overspent typically by something like 10% of their wages for years and years and years on credit, on store cards, credit cards, on loans, remortgaging their house to take out the equity and fund a massive spree of overconsumption that we had, fueled by too much debt and the wrong sort of lending. And there has to be a period of less if you've had a period of too much, and that's going to take some time to work itself off.
Tell me about the coalition government, how they're dealing with the current situation of the British economy. Obviously, the public sector workers have all come out to the streets in protest of their pensions. Now, apart from that, there seems to be a widening gap between the rich and poor class. Tell me about the expenditure. Where's all this money going? Many say that a lot of money is being spent across the borders of Britain, even in the wars in Afghanistan. But I'd like to talk more about that a little bit later. But if you can tell me about how this is, how the coalition government is dealing with this, and also the impact that the Eurozone crisis has on the British government decision making?
Well, it's difficult for the British government to try and pull something out of the bag when in many ways you've used up most of your bullets. We can't really cut interest rates a lot more. We're in austerity, so we can't stimulate the economy through more fiscal stimulus. We've printed quite a lot of money. It's very difficult to we probably will print more, but there is inflation to worry about as well. In the midst of a slowing global economy, which has really been showing signs of slowing for probably about a year now. This crisis in Europe is massively affecting confidence. It's affecting consumer confidence, it's affecting business confidence, and it's affecting investor confidence. And that has a huge knock-on effect. And also, if the Eurozone continues down a slowing growth path, then Europe is our biggest trading bloc, and therefore that affects the UK massively. And I think that it's very difficult for the coalition to pull something out of the bag in this way. Ideally, what you want to do is cut taxes in key areas to try and stimulate growth. And I think the Chancellor would like to do that if we could get control of the public spending, which at present we're not at all.
Right. I'd like to move on to the how this is actually affecting the public itself, the public services. So we've got ambulance services have halved their call-out services throughout the country. The NHS has lost 6,000 of their staff members. 90% of...
This is during the strike?
Yes, this is during the strike. And 90% of schools are expected to have been empty, although there has not been feedback on those statistics. It's expected to be empty by union staff. Now, the public say this has brought a bit of a standstill to the country. Although the airports have not been shut down, it has been a bit of a standstill in the country, and it's likely to get worse. Are we expected within the next few months to see more protests? Also we've seen the issue with the Buckingham Palace, where even Queen Elizabeth has said that, if my staff goes out to strike, I will halve their salary. So it's actually to this extent. How is the British government responding to these protests themselves? What measures are they taking?
Well, at the moment they're standing firm, and I think that they should stand firm. And I think it would be a disaster if the government gave in to the unions. And I think that it's important to stay the course and restructure the economy appropriately and move to a sustainable growth path further on that's not based on very high taxation to fund a bloated public sector. But the rebalancing of the economy is going to take time, and it's going to be painful. And protests will carry on, and union militancy will carry on, and that's just part and parcel of how the world works, because I don't think that
But many protesters would say that they would perhaps feel that the government is ignoring them when they want their voices to be heard.
Let's make things clear. The government doesn't have a pot of gold. The government doesn't have its own money. The government has your and my money that we pay in our taxes. So the point is that if you're creating a job in the public sector, you're destroying more than one job in the private sector, because you're taking money, losing some in administration, and passing it over. So the private sector has to be substantially bigger than the public sector so it can afford to pay for it. If you have a overtaxed private sector, you take away the incentive, you take away what matters in the private sector, which is the incentive to make money, the incentive to work that extra hour, the incentive to take the economy forward. A punitive taxation environment is no good for anyone. And we have to perhaps reassess exactly what the government does, or be far more efficient about how we do it, because it simply isn't affordable to have public services which is 50% of GDP. It just isn't affordable long term. Not with all the other issues that we have, which is an ageing population, the increasing cost of care and pensions that ensues from that. The situation is what it is, and you have to go through difficult times to restructure.